Without the fanfare surrounding a national election or a citywide race, candidates are jockeying to become Brooklyn's next district attorney. The seat is open with the passing of Ken Thompson last year, and the field for September's primary includes 3 people who have worked or are currently working in the DA's office.
One of them is Patricia Gatling, and a look at her bio shows she has made a career in criminal justice. Ms. Gatling was Special Assistant DA under Elizabeth Holtzman, Bureau Chief of Narcotics for DA Charles Hines, served as Human Rights Commissioner for New York City, and was appointed Deputy Secretary for Civil Rights for New York State. And now she wants to be Brooklyn's next DA. We are very pleased to have Patricia Gatling join us here on BK Live. Welcome, Pat.
Delighted to be here. It's nice to meet you all.
Thank you for braving the weathers. Yeah.
I know, right?
So you've already got a lot of jewels on that resume. Why the Brooklyn District Attorney job, and why now?
You know, I start every sentence off with, in times like these. You know, it's sort of a biblical phrase. When you look at what's going on in the country, when I think about the disparity of income between African Americans and white Americans, $11,000 mean household, white Americans $140,000, and a lot of that is in part due to mass incarceration in our communities being without people that were able, you know, to work during their young years and provide incomes. And you know, Martin Luther King talked about how law and order exist for justice in society, and if we don't have justice, it slows social progress. And so for me, as a civil rights attorney, this is sort of the last ground that we have to break, and we have to turn this criminal justice system around. In Brooklyn, we can do it. We can make it a model of justice for this country so that we can bring back fundamental fairness. We can bring integrity into this system, and we can do away with mass incarceration. I tell everyone, how we handle mass incarceration is we starve it to death. We don't put people in jails and prisons. You know, we have more brown people in jails, prisons, and on probation and parole than they had slaves during the Civil War.
So who wants to hear a DA say, I don't want to put people in jail? You're supposed to have law and order and locking people up.
Well, you know, people say that, but you know, the DA is about public safety. And I think that when you look at that umbrella of public safety, it means a lot of things. But do we have moral obligations? Yeah, we still have moral obligations to make sure that those 6% people who commit 60% of the crimes are prosecuted, and not entire communities or neighborhoods because they're poor. So while of course we want a safe and secure Brooklyn, you know, look, I was in Brooklyn in the 90s when it wasn't safe, it wasn't secure, and I don't know if you remember, but you know, this area was a different area. You just didn't go walking at any time of the night, you know, and now we have this great Brooklyn. I started in Brooklyn, was the 4th most violent city in this country. And now it's the hippest place in the world. And that's great, but we still have a moral obligation to not make sure that justice is equal for all of us in this county, but that we take our ideas and export them to the world, because that's what we do in Brooklyn.
When did we get so off track in the criminal justice system?
You know, I think, you know, having been a narcotics prosecutor, I think it started in narcotics. You know, I travel around the world and lecture on can we have security in this time of terrorism and also maintain our human rights? The short answer is yes, we can. But I think what happened is we legislated during the drug times out of pain. And Mexicans have a saying, and I can't translate it in Spanish, but in English, that's what it means. Don't legislate out of pain, meaning we responded to a serious problem. You know, we were losing a baby a day. We were sort of on dead baby counts. I was going to funerals of mothers who were losing in their homes because people were shooting, you know, outside and bullets flying. And I think that because of that, and because of all of the collateral damage that came with the drug gangs, and people just responded, and they responded with Rockefeller drug laws. And at the time, you know, we didn't think they were so bad because But we
needed
didn't.
something.
We needed a quick fix, and we didn't look and think about the future consequences of the communities. And then you couple that, you move a little bit forward. In the Clinton era, we had the 3 strikes and you're out. And then, you know, the President Clinton at the time was putting a lot of money into prosecution, and, you know, and that it was sort of the politics of the day was hard on crime. So we went from being a community talking about, okay, if you commit a crime and you have to go to jail, we think that there's rehabilitation going on in jail, which absolutely there is not. And then we go from that to saying, well, now you can't even come home and live in the development you live in because you've been committed of this crime. And so it was a response, and it was a bad response. It was a failed response. We know that it took communities working with law enforcement, working with social services agencies. It took drug treatment. I mean, part of the issues in Baltimore relate to the fact that they don't have enough drug treatment beds because they don't have the kind of finances that we have here in Brooklyn and in this city.
So, as going back to what you were talking about in these times, you've had your tenure at the DA's office. You've also been back in the private sector and in other city agencies. So, using that perspective, what's lacking there? What course would you set as our district attorney?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to understand that there are systemic problems. There are systemic racial disparities in these offices. You know, I was a human rights commissioner for 13 years.
In the district attorney's office, too, specifically?
Yeah, in the district attorney. I mean, if you look, you know, we have to look at our cases and look. We know that this goes on. And a lot of it is not necessarily deliberate, but, you know, we all have our innate biases, and this is what's been happening. So we need to review and understand what has been going on in the office in terms of our cases, and is everyone being treated equally? I mean, part of my platform is, you know, we need a prosecutor's integrity bureau. And in that integrity bureau comes this audit group. And the audit group are not necessarily the prosecutors that are prosecuting the cases, but people who are professionals and conduct, you know, academics counts. You know, as a scholar, you know, and I've worked with people on these kinds of endeavors, and the more information you have, the better in terms of justice and outcomes. And what kind of outcomes do we want? You know, when I talk about, you know, the poor and the addicted, does it pay for us to send someone to Rikers for $110,000 a year? Or are we going to try and figure out what caused this problem to begin with, if it's not a violent problem, and work with some of these social agencies? You know, when I became a human rights commissioner, because I was a prosecutor, say, for 15 years and then one civil rights lawyer for 13, the difference I noticed in myself was that as a prosecutor, I viewed the cases in terms of enforcement and an outcome. You know, I mean, but the outcome was fixing this problem and fixing it as quickly as I could fix the problem with the law. Versus being a human rights lawyer and a civil rights lawyer, I'm thinking in terms, and I'm looking in terms of human suffering. And, you know, and so now I combine that and I say, we've had a lot of collateral damage, and that's the human suffering. And not only with regard to people who were wrongfully convicted, but with regard to other people who were poor and who were addicted or who had mental health illness. And, you know, and not only were they damaged in the system, but their families. And we've got to be responsible and take responsibility for that.
So looking at the field right now, we have 2 African-American women who have their hats in the ring, an openly gay person, a Hispanic person. So it's as diverse as we are in Brooklyn.
Right.
So is there a way to be a black woman DA, an openly gay man DA that is different from just the sort of law and order version of a prosecutor that some people say we deserve? You go in there, you prosecute the things. What is it uniquely about the perspective of any of those people that should make us pull the lever for them?
Well, you know, I think a lot of it has to do with walking in the shoes. You know, certainly I'm an African-American woman who came through the South through segregation, and I've walked in those, so I know how painful discrimination can be. You know, the other individuals have similar life experiences. You know, when you bring your life, you know, life experience kind of fill in for other experiences that you may not have, for actual work experiences. You know, they've not been civil rights lawyers. I've been a civil rights lawyer, so I have that experience, plus I have my own life inherent experiences. And that's what all of these candidates, you know, it's sort of my experience as an individual, you know, someone growing up as a person of color or a gay man, or, you know, have an impact on how I see the world. And it's really what you identify with. But this is a 1,200 person office, most people don't realize, with, if the mayor has, his budget weighs a $94 million budget, although Brooklyn doesn't get as much money as Manhattan, and that needs to be changed. But, you know, and it's a management issue as much as it is a vision for justice. And, you know, certainly all of these candidates, and with the exception of one person running, I think that they all have decent visions. I mean, they're not bad.
Who's the exception?
Right.
Well, you know, I mean, I think that, you know,
just
there's
name
some
names here.
We just go there, you know.
Who's
But
the
you know,
person?
I think, you know, the city council member running might have a
So
different vision.
Vincent Gentile. we're
Yeah,
talking
you know,
about.
I think, you know, certainly he thinks it's a progressive vision. I don't know. I mean, you were sitting in the city council. Why does Brooklyn have less money? I mean, you know, to me, that was your job in the city council, to make sure we had equity here in Brooklyn.
Do you feel like you have the most progressive view?
You know, they say that everyone sort of, we're out progressing each. I say, I'm not using the progressive word, because I think progressive is kind of a noun. I tell everyone I'm a reformer, and my track record has always been about reform, even at the Human Rights Commission. And I think that I am a criminal justice reformer who has progressive vision, of course, because that's the, you know, the community that has been most harmed is the community that I come from. So it goes without saying that, you know, I want, you know, equal justice, fundamental fairness. I want integrity. I want transparency.
Yeah.
It goes, you know, it should go, but I mean, we have to sort of tell people that. But on the same hand, I understand that people want justice. They don't want to be burglarized.
Right.
You know, they don't, you know, and we still have pockets of crime in Brooklyn where children are still getting shot in the head and mothers are still losing their children. And so we have to address those issues. But we address them through the system, not by labeling who they are, where they come from, or what, you know, by what illness they may have. We address that by attacking those 6% that are causing that 60%.
Right. Well,
crime.
We have just about a minute left, Pat. Let's turn very quickly to effectiveness. Speaking of your track record, you've worked in offices that have been criticized for being ineffective or lax. What do you say to that?
Well, you know, I say to those critics, you know, I sat there for 13 years. Why didn't you say that 13 years ago? You know, and I think that we've sort of became victims of our own success, because most of you never even heard of the Human Rights Commission until we arrived and took care of a 5,000 backlog. People said, close the agency down. But the Human Rights Commission here in New York City is the oldest civil rights agency in this country. So that was not acceptable. So we went in and we handled the backlog of cases. Some were 20 years old. And we didn't dismiss those cases. We got settlements. I was getting millions and millions of dollars in settlements for people who had had cases languishing there 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so they talk about effective. Well, you know, advocates say what advocates say. At least they have something to criticize. With the other candidates, what agency did they run?
Where were they?
Where were they?
Patricia
Right.
Gatling, one of the candidates for Brooklyn District Attorney. Thank you for your time.
And thank you for having me.
See you at the
Thank you.
polls.
Hope I see you there.
All right.
That's right.